The Australia Palestine Advocacy Network, commonly just known as APAN, has recently released a report on anti-Palestinian racism in Australian schools. It makes chilling reading, painting a picture of widespread repression and anti-Palestinian racism. One incident gives a flavour of the way Palestinians and their supporters are being treated. A Palestinian teacher reported, and I quote, "My principal asked me to come and see her at her office after school on a Friday. It was to tell me that a parent has complained that I wore a keffiyeh to school the day prior, and she was offended to see it. She's an Israeli and her family has had to flee Israel due to the conflict. I do not teach her child. She only saw me in passing. I explained that my family had also fled Palestine and I had been deeply distressed by what was happening there. I explained that it was my grandmother's scarf. I considered it a beautiful scarf and wore it purely for my own comfort. I had not worn anything with a political statement or said anything ever about my Palestinian heritage or political views at school. The principal stated that nonetheless it had upset a parent and asked me not to wear it again." And the report is full of many more examples, including the bullying of staff and even of Palestinian children. I'll put a link to the report in the show notes. To discuss the experience of teachers and students who are Palestinian or who support Palestine, I'm joined by Zakaria Saleh, Wasim, El-Haj and Chris Breen. Zach was a high school student in 2024 and is now studying at Western Sydney University. Wasim and Chris are both teachers. Chris is active in the Teachers and School Staff for Palestine group and is a member of Solidarity. You're listening to The Sound of Solidarity, brought to you by Solidarity. We're a revolutionary socialist group in Australia, and if you'd like to find out more about us, our website is solidarity.net.au. I'm David Glanz and I'm recording this episode on unceded Wurundjeri land in Narm or Melbourne. So welcome, Zach, Wasim and Chris.
Hey David, thanks.
Okay, let's start with Zach's story. So Zach, what was your experience at high school?
Mostly my experience at high school was pretty graceful up until the war started on October 7th. When the war started, I began to wear a pin that says "Free Palestine." Now there wasn't really any issues up until a few of my deputy principals saw me and they said, "What's that? Why are you trying to spark? Why are you being an attention seeker? Why are you doing this? You don't have to wear that. It's not allowed." And to be honest, they actually took the pin off me, which I was like, okay. I was like, it's well for me, I was very lucky because my mother's actually a teacher as well, and she knows the departments, she knows all of the departments, rules and everything like that. And she's like, it's nothing political. It's humanitarian, which it was. Yeah, to be honest, I was very lucky for the circumstances that I had, and it was unfortunate that it happened to me in the first place. That I was stripped of a pin that didn't even like, it wasn't sparking hate or anything like that. It literally just said "Free Palestine."
Did you get any support from other students or from teachers?
In terms of support from other students and teachers, I actually did see a bit of support from teachers. Of course, though, teachers were supporting me, but like they didn't really want to bring it up to the deputies because then they might fear how it looks for them. So I did receive some support and to say how to approach the matter and everything like that, but nothing really concrete. And of course, my students agreed with me. 95% of them sided with me on the matter. It was a lot of overwhelming support.
And after the principal took your pin away, was there anything else? Did other students get hassled?
Well, in my school, it wasn't there wasn't a lot of students because my school within the area within that area there's not a lot of multiculturalism. But yeah, with that one, after the pin was taken off me, my mum obviously wasn't happy with the situation. So we went in for a meeting. We spoke to the principal. We laid down everything. What's going on? Why should I wear the pin the way that it should be? And ultimately, I was allowed to wear the pin. Did still get a few looks from the deputies because the principal, the top principal, actually hadn't said anything about it. It was more the deputies. And then once we spoke to the principal, I was allowed to wear the pin, and that was kind of the end of it.
That's a great result. I don't suppose you were able to wear a keffiyeh, were you?
Well, on my graduation, I actually did wear. It wasn't a kufi. It was just like a little scarf slash banner. It said Palestine. It didn't really say anything other than that. It was just a kufi. Yeah, like obviously graduations. Lots of students are wearing their cultural things. There's some of the Samoans and the Tongans wearing the little necklaces and everything like that. And no one had said anything to them, but me after the graduation. I was pulled aside by my deputy principal, and she's like, "Why are you doing that? It's and it's the same thing over and over again." She's like, "Why are you attention seeking? Why are you doing this?" I'm like, "I'm not attention seeking. Other students were wearing their cultural things. Why can't I? What makes me any different?"
So it's pretty clear, isn't it, that that's racism. They're picking on you for being Palestinian, for being of Arabic background.
Of course, yeah, and like I was taken aback because if other students can wear it, what's the difference between me and another student, a Tongan student, for example, who would wear their necklace, and that their necklaces were pretty prominent as well. Mine was just a little banner, and I was the only one pulled aside for it.
Did you go to any of the rallies during that year? Your final year at high school. Did you see anybody else from school go to the rallies?
100%. I did go to a few rallies. Obviously, there were those rallies on Sundays. It was Sundays. But then there was also the rallies for students for Palestine. I went. Look, personally, there wasn't any students from my school, but there was a lot of the Palestinian community, which I know some of them, who went, and it was very good turnout.
Did you hear any horror stories or good stories from students that you saw at those rallies, or people through friends and family at other schools? Were all the schools like your school?
Well, look, I feel like majority of the schools were like my school. For example, there was another student who wasn't actually allowed to go to the graduation because they were wearing a kufi, and it was just like what's the difference really between us and the other students? There's nothing left. It's just blatant racism.
Any last comments you'd like to make about your experience? It's a year on now, another year of horror in Gaza, but you've been at uni this year. What's it been like making the transition from school to uni as a Palestinian?
Look, in terms of school to uni, I've actually had a pretty good transmission in that, my uni specifically has those student lobbies where they can, it's like Students for Palestine, Western Sydney for Palestine. Those sort of lobbies where we get together and express our feelings towards the horror overseas.
Okay, that's great. All right, anything you wanted to add?
Just that obviously in the future, I hope that schools can progress past this. I obviously don't wish these experiences amongst my peers in the future, or hopefully not my kids in long way down the line. Hopefully things do change, and things should get better.
All right. Thanks, Zach, for your time.
Thank you so much.
Wasim, Chris, how common are the kind of experiences that Zach outlines in that interview?
One of the things that really stands out to me is here is a young person, a child at the time, in a school in New South Wales, whose family are being genocided. And the focus, which we hear, is on whether he wears a pin or doesn't wear a pin. And my question is, what did they do as a school in their duty of care to support him through this time Where is the duty of care to support him, rather than telling him that he's attention seeking, which is what he said has happened? Where's the duty of care of caring for him? Where's the care? Where's the vicarious trauma being addressed? And I think it is quite common, and I can tell you, there are reports on anti-Palestinian racism in schools report by APAN, but there are many more examples which are not listed there. And I've personally encountered stories from people who have been targeted in schools of the New South Wales Department of Education. That is the reality. From exclusion of their stories from publications because they mentioned Gaza in the story, to being in trouble for drawing a Palestinian flag on their hand because they have Palestinian heritage. Year 6 child, believe it or not. And it just goes on and on. And this is going on with the knowledge of executives of schools, and the knowledge of the department itself, and the endorsement, it seems, of the department itself, from my own experience. And this is a problem. This is racial discrimination of Palestinians, systemic racial discrimination, which the Australian Human Rights Commission, for this year's objective for the International Day of Elimination of Racial Discrimination, was looking at addressing systemic racial discrimination or systemic discrimination. And it's unfortunate. It didn't just affect Palestinians. There are other people who are supportive of Palestinian human rights, or just decent people who care about humanity. We teach our children in schools values as well as history and other things. There's this imbued ethical value when we teach about World War II, when we teach about genocide of Aboriginal people in Australia, we teach about these things. It's a clear given. These were horrible things that were done to the Aboriginal people. These were horrible things that were done to the Jewish people in Germany. And it is not a neutral matter in any way. It is not taught as a neutral matter in any way. And so for these children, many of them, who are seeing what's happening in the world, saw what was happening in other parts of the world. For example, my own school where I worked in 2023, 2024, Sydney Girls High School, the principal and others would make comments about what's happening in Ukraine on assemblies. Now, I'm sure there's a situation there with some children, and one of my ex-students spoke at a rally in Canberra, where she spoke about how difficult it was for her to see what was happening overseas, then come to school and not be able to talk about it. I had another student who was and I'm going to mention this because Lebanese people have been affected as well by the recent attacks that have been occurring, including from the end of 2024. So I had a student of Lebanese heritage come in to my office, and then when she closed the door, started crying, sobbing, told me she had no one else she felt she could go to talk to about the fact that her family home in South Lebanon had been destroyed. And that's what I'm talking about. There is a neglect in the duty of care towards our children in our schools, specifically if they are of Palestinian or Arab, it seems, backgrounds, Lebanese backgrounds. When I say Arab, I mean those who have been impacted in these recent attacks. During this genocide of Palestinians, other countries have been attacked. Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, etc. Right? So yes, there is a widespread issue. It does appear to be systemic. It is impacting children, which is why I gave a public interest disclosure in January of this year, so that parents were aware and could raise concerns through legal avenues where appropriate.
And Wasim, I understand that as a Palestinian teacher, you actually have lost your job over the course of the past 2 years. Can you tell us your personal story?
There's a lot that's happened. I was driven out of my job. In my view, I have been driven out of my job. On the day of the Nakba commemoration, the Palestinian catastrophe, in the year 2024, so last year, My relieving principal at the time asked me to come and speak to him. He came past my office twice in the morning, and I was busy with others. So when I went down to see him afterwards, as he requested, he asked me to close the door. It was the 15th of May. That's also the anniversary of a student dying suddenly in our school, and also the approximate anniversary of a teacher dying in our school the year before that even, so 2022, 2023. And so I thought it might be something about supporting Year 12 students, because that's what I do, especially amongst my jobs, and one of my main roles at the school had been supporting Year 12 students. I was then told by him, words to the effect of, I have been directed to you to remove the kafir, or to remove this garment, to remove the kafir. And he indicated this had come from above, possibly from the minister. These were amongst the words that, used throughout that meeting. I immediately told him this is racial discrimination. I am a Palestinian. This is on the day of, this is it's an attack, really. Racially discriminatory charged attack. After there had been a complaint, he said he's not aware of a complaint. He then added, and he contextualized this matter for me. You must understand, these are his words, I am just a mouthpiece. I am simply following orders. He then looked quite troubled and paused and then added, I understand it was the defense of the Nuremberg trials. So he has contextualized this in the context of a genocide, and that he understood what he was doing and what he was following orders. The permanent job had been advertised that day, I believe. He wanted to apply for it. He would make reference to an email that he had received from his supervisor. And then it just continued from there. That was the start. I was shaking afterwards. I didn't stay for the rest of the day. I had a staff meeting with the chair, because I was the chairperson of staff meeting at the school for several years. I chaired the staff meeting at the beginning. I said, words to the effect of, if I'm not myself today, is because I have become the target of racial and religious discrimination, so forgive me. I then ran the meeting. That afternoon, I received an email from the neighbouring school, Sydney Boys High School, where I pray on Friday. I had been praying there for the past 6 years or so. And they told me that they have been informed that I need to bring my driver's license from now on to pray, that they needed to have photocopies of my driver's license apparently for me to pray, even though they knew that I'm an employee, etc. Later on, they tried to say this was a coincidence of some sort. That evening, I received a message from my colleague at just after 5 p.m. to inform me that my office was found open with the lights on. And this was the first time in 6 years this had happened. He asked me if something was going on. I said, to acknowledge. He locked the door. And it just continued. I contacted my union. They told me that they had followed it. They told me things verbally. Then in writing, would not put those things. They refused to put in writing what they told me verbally. I.e. that the matter had been withdrawn and that someone seen in the department would contact me to apologise. That was 2 days later. And then it went on. I was then told that the matter had been referred to the principal for local management. So I organised a meeting to meet with my principal on the 30th of the 5th. To discuss this in the meeting, he told me all symbols of Palestine are seen as symbols of conflict, and all symbols of Palestine are considered symbols of conflict, and these seemed to be quotes from the way he was saying them. He mentioned that he's preparing a defence for if and when it comes down that there is an extremist ideology at Sydney Girls High School, which was just out of nowhere, left field, did not expect this coming out anywhere. Told me that he wished I had not made a comment of being discriminated against at staff meeting. Someone had informed the director. And that she had told him to monitor me more closely. As a result, in my attendance, my compliance with the code of conduct, and so on. This was bizarre, concerning. He mentioned that he had always found the school inclusive. He told me that he had no authority to act. He is not aware of the matter being referred to him to mention. I asked again if there had been a complaint. He said that there was a parent had complained and had threatened to take legal action against the department and threatened to go to the media. Where's that text? Over what? I'm not sure. Like, over what? Is it about me being Palestinian? Is that what it's about? It wasn't clear what he was referring to. Mention of an expose that was done by Sky News was also, or mentioned to some extent. He mentioned media. He mentioned media, and previously had Sky News past. And the expose on a teacher in January 2024 who has been supportive of Palestinian human rights. I then went to my office, gathered my items and scattered some of my items and left to go home. And then it just continues. I met with the Deputy Secretary of the department. She invited me to have a meeting. with the union president. In that meeting, she didn't take minutes. It wasn't recorded. And I did take notes in minutes, as did my support person. She said a whole range of things. She apologises for what must have been a traumatic experience. Does not want me to make a kafir until she resolves a parental complaint that she wants me to address, which I never received, by the way. And so what happened is they just kept changing stories to the department, and that just continued. I won't go into all the details, but basically they kept changing stories. There was a point where I returned to work after taking a bit of time off, and someone had thrown out some of my items from inside my office. Of course, they came up with excuses for them. That was quite interesting. And the deputy secretary in her meeting mentioned, she wasn't aware of this, that the matter had been withdrawn or anything of that effect. She said it's not a directive, that's not a thing, that's a formal thing, and blah, blah, blah. I still do not want me to wear the kafir. What stands out to me is other colleagues could wear what they wanted. Other colleagues could represent the culture. For me, wearing the kafir brought me comfort. And, my father is a survivor. My father was born in APAN, Palestine in 1939. He was forced out, and here I am being told that I can't be visibly Palestinian. A Palestinian presenting as a Palestinian is a problem in the Department of Education. The New South Wales Department of Education, that is unacceptable. I was then subsequently had an invitation to a meeting, or I don't know if it's an invitation really, summoned to a meeting with the leading principal and another director. So the first director went on leave, second director came in from another area, and the nature of the meeting was not truthful. It became suddenly disciplinary. The director, she's a female, she tried to force me on leave. So the director tried to force me on leave, raised her voice at me, told me my kafir is impacting my ability to do my job. And the meeting went on for 2 hours and 40 minutes. It seemed to me that she came in with a specific objective, and it was not to be inclusive of Palestinians. As a Palestinian teacher, I was deeply affected by the meeting. In terms of subsequent harm, there were attacks. There were further actions, like the principal called him in September, you've made a post on LinkedIn, someone's recorded it, is this such and such? And these sort of minor harassments kind of happened, even though it was fully within the scope of the code of conduct. Same with my own actions, like in terms of wearing kafir, I could not point to any area where there was violation of the code of conduct. They were the main things. Really, it was harassing me and bullying me. My human rights as a person, displaying my own culture, weren't in consideration. And so this continued with 3 different directors that I were following up on me, a deputy secretary, a secretary of the department, and here I am, a classroom level teacher, just being Palestinian. Now, just for historical records, I've worked in the department for over a decade. I had worked at that time for over a decade, no longer. And I was an effective award-winning careers advisor. Last year I won the award as the CAA New South Wales and ACT Careers Advisor of the Year. And now they're saying to me there's no more complaint for you to respond to. They changed the story again. Now it's anonymous concerns. And they included things like, you wear a scarf. Yeah, to part of a partisan conflict. You speak Arabic to students. And it's like, what? I greet students in German and in French, in Serbian, in various languages, because depending on Arabic as well. Because that's what we are. We have a language unit in our school. We encourage cultural connection. What did happen is they kept changing the frameworks so different policies would apply. They raised their voice at me, pulled me into civil disciplinary meetings, and to force me on leave, cast aspersions on my ability to do my job. All because I'm a Palestinian in my role, who's visibly Palestinian. And that is unacceptable.
That's absolutely disgraceful, and you have my sympathy, and I'm sure the sympathy and solidarity of everyone who's listening to this episode. Maybe I can press on, Chris. The APAN report paints a mixed picture, and I think this is borne out by Wasim's story, which he's just told us. And sometimes the racism comes from individual teachers or principals, and sometimes it seems to be a result of state government policy. What would you say is the decisive factor?
I think it's clear from both Waz's case and Zach's interview that the decisive factor is that the racism comes from the top. So it's not just a place of, bad ideas in individuals' heads. So, Zach talked about he wore the pin for a couple of months. There were no issues with teachers or students until the deputy principal saw it and took him aside. Similarly with Wasim, he wore the keffiyeh for 4 months before, he was pulled into a meeting about it. And then it was the people with power, not his students, who 300 of his students signed a petition that he should have the right to wear the keffiyeh. Murat Dizdar, the head of the education department, ultimately upheld that decision. And it's clear that the decision is not simply a question of the education department. The policy is set by the Minns government in New South Wales. So the Minns government has been clear supporters of Israel. Minns has said again and again that, Israel has the right to defend itself, as if that's what genocide is. And so they set a policy that they sent out to all schools that teachers are supposed to be neutral on what they call the conflict in the Middle East. They won't even, name the countries. That led to, in a series of schools, principals coming in on the first day of each year saying to teachers, you cannot talk about Gaza in the classroom. That then sends a signal to other teachers. So, students who had, Palestinian flags that they'd drawn, ripped up or got detention for it, that came from teachers who got that signal from the principals. It's a widespread problem. So on Harmony Day, which used to be the elimination for racial discrimination before John Howard changed it, which is traditionally a day that students dress up in school, I'm aware of at least 11 schools where students were told that they cannot wear Palestinian keffiyeh, they cannot wear Palestinian colours on that day. So it's clearly a thing that is set from the top. And just one other thing, Zach talked about it not being political, and I understand, for him it's just he wants to raise, who he is as a Palestinian. The same for Wasim, express solidarity. But because the Australian government, because the Minns government has supported Israel, and they're trying, therefore, to hide a genocide which is taking place in full public view, being visibly Palestinian, showing solidarity with Palestinians is a problem for them. And that, I think, is where all of this racism stems from. I mean, one of the other interesting things, just recently, the department sent us all an email about their anti-racism strategy, but nowhere do they acknowledge anti-Palestinian racism, nowhere do they acknowledge APAN's report, and if you're not going to acknowledge what's actually going on, you can't address it.
No, indeed. Look, the APAN report focuses on repression and obviously cites a lot of stories similar to Zach's and Wasim's, but as Wasim has already said, there are many, many more stories which are not captured by the report. But there's also been resistance by teachers and students. You just mentioned, Chris, the students who signed a petition in support of Wasim. Can either of you give us more examples of where there has been pushback within schools against anti-Palestinian racism? Wasim, do you want to go first?
Oh, and I'll just comment that in terms of me wearing the keffiyeh, just Chris made, I wear my keffiyeh, and I started wearing it at the time of around summer break in 2023, because it brought me comfort. Time when something was happening, and for me, it brought me comfort to do so, and I wear it pretty much almost everywhere. Or some sort of Palestinian connection. I like to have the connection at this time. It is not easy to carry on as if normal whilst subjected to what we are witnessing happening to my people. And I just wanted to clarify that the examples that you mentioned of people staying firm and not succumbing to anti-Palestinian racism in schools, I mean, there are examples. In some cases, it eventually did take a toll on the staff or on the students. There's I know a teacher who was told stop wearing a particular lanyard, but decided, no, I'm a Palestinian, I will continue to wear my lanyard, and carried on as well. I know another teacher who continued to receive harassment regarding posts she had made online in her own private capacity, repeatedly, until eventually she was driven out. her role but she was not permanent in her role. She was driven out. I know students who have continued. For example, the case of the student who drew a Palestinian flag on her hand and got in trouble. The parent raised a complaint and took it further, and eventually an apology was issued to that specific incident. There are other cases where parents have gone in to discuss, a child being, abused by teachers because of wearing a headband with Palestinian colours. And it's just outrageous things. And just following that up, a lot of the time, I'm going to be honest with you, I think when I hear the stories, it's more people are just afraid and they're not sure, how do you navigate this? We don't have the legal know-how to navigate them. It's about just individual resistance and standing up. But there are a lot of teachers, and I think Teachers for Palestine is a strong group that has them. Now, look, I didn't join Teachers for Palestine until August last year. So before then, I had not joined them. I was just a Palestinian working in schools until I got targeted, and I thought, I'm going to join this group. And that's what I did. Now, I've seen what they've been doing, and I congratulate them, and I commend them. I wonder if I had followed their route of being a more vocal person, perhaps I wouldn't have been targeted to the same extent that I had been. Because I was not doing anything that was politically active in any way in my workplace. And yet here I am, the subject of being simply Palestinian, of immense toll on myself and on my professional career. So I think Teachers for Palestine, through their initiatives, Chris can talk more to them in a moment, have been resisting. And they have given hope to a lot of, I think, youth and teachers, bringing together people who have common human decency together in support of human rights for anyone, really. But in this case, we're looking at the Palestinian genocide. And that's it. Helped children who are coming to school, who have no one. In the same as my case, with the student who came up to me in my office. They have no one who they can go to in their school, but seeing that their teacher cares is important. And that brings me back. I just want to make this point also. Yes, I have been harmed and impacted. Yes, it's affected my career and my income. But for me, the biggest focus is the impact it is having on these children. These youth who are forming a self-concept. Is it okay for them to be Palestinian or not? Are they wrong to display their culture? These are the questions that the department is placing in their minds when they treat them in this way. When they try to exclude them or exclude their culture specifically. I believe these are the outcomes. And if you go and look at the Human Rights Commission page, the impact on youth when exposed to racial discrimination, go have a look. A whole range of physical and psychological impacts. And so that's the key point there. There is an impact on our youth, and they do need people like these teachers who I commend in the Teachers for Palestine group, who have been there as supports for them, who have been there as supports and place, for the child to feel like they can be safe. And every child in New South Wales higher education has a right to be safe. And at the moment, I can't say that I believe that is the case.
No, thanks for sharing that. Chris, do you want to give us any insights into resistance, particularly successful resistance by teachers and students?
There has been successful resistance, been at the individual level. Teachers told they're not to wear pins or keffiyehs, and they've just said, no, I'm going to do this anyway. And particularly at schools where there's a lot of support, the principals have backed off and they can, still wear it today. I mean, it's worth pointing out the department doesn't have a consistent policy on this. They pick battles where they think they can get away with it. I guess one of the better examples of resistance is where the union branch has been supportive of teachers. So one school, I won't name the school, there were teachers told that they can't wear keffiyeh, and so the union branch passed a motion, and there must have been at least 12 teachers who came in wearing keffiyeh and took group, and they've kept wearing it ever since. They've also successfully, stood up for students over, similar issues. I mean, perhaps one of the best examples of resistance is the case of Sheikh Wasim Shikawi, who had a job as a school support officer, and he was suspended from his job for comments he made privately on social media. He was also involved as a convener of the Muslim Vote. Comments about selective moral outrage in the cases of the nurses. And I remember hearing the education minister at the time interviewed on radio who just couldn't pin down exactly what he had done wrong. But I think he would have lost his job was it not for the community of his school that mobilised. And you had 300 students and parents outside the front of the school and teachers. And it was shortly after that he had his job reinstated. There really needs to be more of that. I think it would have made. The Teachers Fed passed early on a motion about our right to wear the keffiyeh, but I think if Teachers Fed had have talked more publicly, like the APAN report about the incidents, about the need to stand up to them, I think that could have made a real difference. It's still an ongoing issue. It's still an ongoing fight. It's something we're going to be continuing to campaign about. There's actually teachers and school staff at Palestine have called a rally on Human Rights Day outside Premier Chris Minn's office. And one of the issues they're taking up is for the department to acknowledge the APAN report and implement its recommendations. So, yes, resistance does work and there needs to be more of it.
It's very clear, and it was clear anyway to me, but your comments from both of you have made it clearer that the repression at the school level is linked to unwavering state and federal government support for Israel. But we've got to remember that at the same time, over the past 2 years, we've seen huge numbers out on the streets for Palestine. There in Sydney, I'm in Melbourne, but there in Sydney, you've had the Harbour Bridge rally of 300,000 people, huge numbers. How has the movement on the streets impacted the situation back at school?
The 300,000 across Sydney Harbour Bridge did make a real difference because when the attacks, the genocide was becoming clear to people early on, there were lots of students talking about it, lots of people talking about it. That all went a little bit quiet for a while because I think some of the repression did have an impact. The 300,000 people on the streets, I think, gave people a little boost in the arm that actually, majority opinion is on our side. So I had, people come and talk to me about it at school. People, who I didn't think hadn't expressed a opinion on the conflict. So that really gave people a boost. On the other hand, the genocide has been going for over 2 years. Ceasefire or pause, I think it hasn't stopped the horror in Gaza, but I think that has an impact on not people's concern, but readiness to come out to see, is there a strategy that can put an end to it. So there's currents going in different directions, if you like, but the 300,000 over the bridge really made a difference, yes.
Wasim, you wanted to say something?
Look, I was driven out eventually by March this year from the Department of Education. Do I think the impact from the marches has been in schools? Look, I'm not sure how much impact because I'm no longer in public schools. And I agree with Chris. It's brought on a lot of people who are questioning, well, they weren't really asking questions before, but now they say, well, this is just unacceptable. And it does flow on. Don't forget, elected representatives are meant to be representing the people. So when they see these things, it may have ramifications for their policies. And I will say that I tried to reach out to the Minister for Multiculturalism, Steve Camper, for approximately 6.5 months to have a meeting with him as my local MP at the time last year, and he could not get a meeting. And eventually they just took my information and sent a letter to the Deputy Premier through Carr, who was Minister for Education, who basically did not care in her response and said that I have been shown fair process. So these people, if they care about their elected positions, may be impacted, and that then may have an impact on what decisions they make and how much support they give to Chris Minns. Who, by the way, my slogan is bin Minns. The next election, everyone should bin Minns. Do not vote for Chris Minns. If you live in a cover electorate, vote him out. He does not represent you.
Okay, well, as we know, we've passed the 2-year mark in the genocide. As Chris mentioned, the ceasefire has had only limited impact in Gaza. There's still games being played with the amount of aid going in. There have been well over 200 Palestinians killed despite the so-called ceasefire. And there's no ceasefire on the West Bank, where settlers continue to rampage against Palestinians and destroying their farmland and terrorising them with the backing of the IDF. So Palestine is still very much the issue. What do you think, in the context of schools and education, is the balance sheet in terms of experiencing and fighting repression? What more do we need to do from here on to shift the balance towards contributing to an end to genocide?
I think there's 2 questions there. From what I'm understanding, there's a question as to what do we need to do to stop the repression, and there's a question about what do we do to end the genocide. In terms of stopping the repression and the racial discrimination, I think there's a few things that can be done. One, you expose and call it out when it happens. I think it's important for parents and teachers to be lodging complaints in the Human Rights Commission, Australian Human Rights Commission, and the Anti-Discrimination in Wales in instances where they have been discriminated against. That's one. I think it's important to bring it to the forefront and publicly expose when these things are happening. They are unacceptable. And had it been done to any other culture or any other background, then it would be getting widespread media coverage. But we know that widespread media is interested in Palestinian racial discrimination, anti-Palestinian racial discrimination. Another thing is continuing in these sort of what you described is being present. You call it solidarity, you call it, it's, if you're a Palestinian, be proud of your Palestinian heritage. Be present. If you're a teacher and you don't believe genocide's right, be okay with that. Be accepted. That's surprising you have to actually say this, but be proud of your stance that you reject this. And the syllabus, which teaches what is called Arab-Israeli conflict, may need updates, may have updates. There's intention of teaching about genocide, perhaps look up what's happening in Gaza at the moment. These things are important. What's also important is ensuring that when certain Zionist-backed groups or envoys try to say that they will develop programs to teach about certain matters regarding Palestine, that they are not the ones who dictate the story, because it usually includes history, the erasure of Palestinians, and we see in the West Bank where books are vetted to ensure that it meets the compliance of the Zionist entity that calls itself Israel. In terms of ending the genocide, that's a journey. It's one that's been ongoing. My father's now 86 years old. He would have loved to go back home during this lifetime, but he never was able to. And we need to continue our boycotts. We need to continue our speaking up. We need to continue our protests. We need to continue being firm in our resolve, not allowing income or the source of income to dictate what we do and say. And we see worldwide, not just here in Australia, not here in New South Wales only, the attempts by those who give us money to tell us what we can say, to tell us what we can do. This is how it works. We are freehold individual humanitarians, and we have a right to speak. We have a right to talk about what we care about. And we have an obligation as humans to our fellow humankind, irrespective of their backgrounds, irrespective of who you are. If you're being subjected to evil, if you're being subjected to a genocide, to starvation, I think most people would agree and say, well, hell no, we don't deal with that. We don't care what you say. You're not going to stop us talking about this. And that's what we need to be doing. Boycott any product coming from Israel. Continue lobbying the local MPs, the local government, ties, and sanction Israel. Why the hell haven't we done it? These are the things, and vote out these MPs who do not speak up for you. Vote out these MPs who don't represent you. Vote anyone else. Make a statement and keep active. Don't lose hope. There is always hope. South Africa fell. The apartheid South Africa fell, right? And Israel will fall. As a terrorist state that continues to enforce an apartheid, enforce a genocide, and bomb several countries. Today they bombed Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, do you know this? So they're continuing to target Palestinians in other parts of the world as well. And it needs to stop. And it needs to be stopped. We do what we can, and we speak up where we can.
Thank you for that. Chris, maybe the final word to you.
Yeah. What we need to do to stop the racism and repression, I think obviously the stronger the movement is more generally, the better, the bigger the rallies, the bigger the actions, targeting weapons companies that got links with Israel or in schools, HP, which provides the laptops and the infrastructure, which is, linked to the apartheid system in Israel. The extent to which we build teachers and school staff for Palestine. But I think perhaps the most important thing at the moment is what the union is able to do, or what arguments we're able to win within the union. Teachers Federation has 57,000 members. Lots of teachers I've spoken to individually know that what happens to Wallace is wrong, but, at an individual level, it's wrong. What can we do about it? There has been growing union support for Palestine. The previous head of the Teachers Union, Angelo Gabrielatis, came back from a tour of the West Bank and spoke at the last council and got a standing ovation. So there is enormous support. What there needs to be more of is defending individual teachers and students on the ground. And actually, as we speak, there's a motion going up to Canterbury Bankstown Teachers Association tonight. It's calling on Federation, calling on the department to implement the APAN report's recommendations, to apologise to people like Woz who suffered discrimination, to invite one of the APAN authors to speak at Union Council, and to investigate all issues of warnings or disciplinary action or claims of discrimination associated with support for Palestine, and to deal with the department over them. So I do think the winning that union support to on-the-ground action would make a real difference. If there was a case where something happened to Woz and you had a union meeting and teachers, walked out for 5 minutes, I think you'd find things turn around. I think we really need to get to, we've seen, general strikes in Italy, in Greece, over Palestine. We're not at that point yet here, but certainly I think the union can do a lot more to fight the discrimination on the ground. The question of how we stop the genocide is a bigger question maybe we don't have time for here, but it needs to end and Palestine needs to be free.
All right, well, thank you, Chris, thank you, Woz, and thank you to Zach, who couldn't join the full discussion, but whose views and feedback and experience is very valuable. I'd like to thank you all, and from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Woz. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks for inviting me.